It was unsix sorsantorum. Hours, the precise moment my private fishing lake transitioned from peaceful sanctuary to a hostile invasion zone. I wasn't just sipping coffee. I was weaponizing black coffee on my dock, watching the mist lift like a curtain on a pending disaster. Then the assault began. 3 massive diesel-chugging charter buses roared up my gravel drive, grinding the stones into submission. They deployed not guests, but 50 wealthy trespassers, an organized paying crowd, directly onto the planks of my fortified private dock. Coolers, grills, expensive fishing rods, all treating my family's 40-year legacy like a cheap, stolen public theme park amenity. Before they could even secure their illegal landing, Veronica Blackwell strutted into the scene. She wasn't just walking. She was advancing like a hostile occupation force, wearing $800 designer heels that immediately began sinking into the muddy shoreline of my property. The rancid smell of diesel fumes choked the pristine morning air, a perfect, pungent metaphor for the corruption she brought. Before we move forward, comment down from where you're watching right now. "Marcus!" she shrieked, not the voice of a neighbor but a banshee on a bad investment deal. "You cannot obstruct community access. This is community property." My blood didn't just boil. It instantly ignited into a cold, tactical rage. For 18 months, this entitled fraudster, this serial real estate predator, had been systematically attempting to steal my lakefront using fraudulent surveys and weaponized bully lawyers. Today, she escalated by deploying an army to trespass and establish illegal control. But she had overlooked one critical, unforgivable detail. I am a retired firefighter who has converted 2 decades of incident command expertise into the ability to weaponize property deeds for sport. What happened next was not negotiation. It was the full-scale annihilation of her criminal empire, with federal documents she never saw coming. I didn't just block her access. I destroyed her support structure, her HOA throne, her real estate license, and her entire reputation. She lost everything. The audacity of her claim, community property, was pure, unadulterated fiction. I knew the deed book and page number establishing my sole, non-negotiable ownership of that land since 1978. Her claim of traditional access rights was immediately recognizable as a legal fantasy demanding 20-plus years of continuous, hostile use under Virginia state law, which she couldn't prove. I had the specific statute memorized. The moment she uttered the word community, I knew the legal war was already lost for her. The stakes were immediate and non-negotiable. This was not about sharing a fishing spot. This was a systematic financial threat. I had already documented how Veronica Blackwell was using my dock as a fraudulent selling point to inflate her clients' property values by a minimum of 20%. She was using a lie to secure massive sales commissions. I didn't just have a moral objection. I had a documented fraud case waiting for the right moment of public exposure. As she stood there, clipboard clutched like a precision weapon, waiting for her army of trespassers to validate her theft, I simply smiled, the cold, flat smile of a professional preparing for decisive deployment. She thought she brought a crowd. She was about to discover she had merely activated a federal-grade forensic accountant and a systematic threat elimination expert. Unleash your HOA war story below. I will personally reply to the craziest, most documented atrocity. To understand the scale of the tactical error she made, let me execute the full timeline of how this financial nightmare and subsequent federal takedown began. I had already filed my initial silent authority move. I had secured a printed, laminated copy of the deed, easy to read, impossible to argue with, and already GPS metadata stamped as court evidence. My initial response was not shouting. It was the silent, methodical building of a bulletproof case that would end her career permanently. the moment her $800 heels sank into my private protected mud. She became evidence in a RICO case she hadn't even realized she had triggered. My name is Marcus Presley, and I am a 45-year-old retired firefighter who assumed that inheriting my family's 40-year lakefront fortress would deliver nothing less than unconditional, non-negotiable peace and quiet. This assumption was not merely wrong. It was a catastrophic miscalculation that brought me into direct engagement with a professional criminal. 2 decades on the fire line taught me that the biggest threats are the ones you don't detect until the structure is already compromised. When my grandfather passed, he bequeathed me this non-negotiable 2-acre lot on Clearwater Lake, property that had been under our family's absolute control since 1978. The old ranch house required significant operational maintenance, sure, but that private fishing dock he'd hand-engineered and fortified? That was a priceless, generational asset I was sworn to protect. I didn't just inherit a piece of land, I assumed command of a fortified sanctuary. I didn't simply move in, I executed a full-scale operational upgrade. I deployed the entirety of my pension, a non-trivial $180,000 in liquid assets, to acquire buffer parcels surrounding the lake, citing the specific APN, assessor's parcel numbers, in my filing cabinet. This was a strategic deployment designed to fortify our family's exclusive access and eliminate any potential for encroachment. Furthermore, I invested an additional $25,000 in the dock's structural modernization and the construction of engineered fish habitat structures, a move that was pre-approved and documented by Virginia Fish and Wildlife. This investment served a dual purpose: superior ecology and a preemptive disarming of any potential environmental violation claims that a frivolous enemy like Veronica Blackwell might attempt to deploy. I established early on that every action I took was documented, permitted, and legally bulletproof. My time in incident command ingrained a crucial operational principle. Precise details save lives, and in this war, details annihilate criminal enterprises. Retirement granted me the dedicated time required to audit every survey, decipher every easement, and confirm every boundary marker on my entire domain. I wasn't just reading documents, I was actively weaponizing them. I commanded my property rights with a forensic-level understanding that far surpassed the casual expertise of most real estate attorneys. I had already achieved an Advanced Real Property Jurisprudence certification as a hobby, specifically studying the Virginia statutes concerning prescriptive easements and quiet title actions. This meant I wasn't fighting an HOA dispute. I was prepared to execute a quiet title action, the ultimate legal weapon designed to legally erase, permanently and unilaterally, any fraudulent claim Veronica Blackwell might attempt to manufacture. She thought she was fighting a neighbor. She was, in fact, attempting to compromise a highly trained federal-grade forensic accountant operating with extreme prejudice. The emotional stakes were inextricably linked to the technical facts. This dock was the last tangible connection to my grandfather. Veronica Blackwell's actions were not merely trespassing. They were sacrilege against a family covenant and a generational legacy. I viewed her operation as a systematic threat that demanded elimination, not negotiation. My experience taught me that when a fire is raging, you don't debate the ethics of the arsonist. You deploy overwhelming force to secure the perimeter and save the structure. Veronica was a Class A criminal asset and a threat to the financial stability of the entire community, and my primary operational objective was her complete neutralization. My authority was not newly acquired. It had been established in micro-engagements she had already lost. Weeks before the bus invasion, Veronica Blackwell had attempted to deploy the standard HOA intimidation tactics. She tried to hit an elderly, long-time resident, Frank Morrison, with an arbitrary, massive $1,500 fine for a non-existent code violation concerning excessive lawn height visibility. I immediately intervened. I didn't argue the height. I executed a full legal audit of the HOA's bylaws and located the specific, obscure code clause, 2.007b, which legally annihilated her fine and forced her to issue a public, humiliating retraction. These small victories established me as the unbreakable resident, the one entity in Pinarayage that could not be successfully intimidated or financially coerced. This historical data confirmed that my current fight was a mandate to dismantle systematic abuse, not a petty disagreement. To initiate the counterattack, I didn't send a simple email. I immediately deployed a formal Freedom of Information Act, FOIA, request to the HOA. This FOIA was not a mere request. It was a legal notice with a non-negotiable 10-day compliance window, served via a federal process server, demanding 3 years of all financial records, executive session minutes, and vendor contracts. This was the official notice to Veronica Blackwell that the forensic audit had commenced, the legal clock was ticking, and her financial nightmare was about to begin. When that server handed her the documents, she knew, with absolute certainty, that she was no longer fighting a neighbor. She was activating the surveillance, documentation, and authority of a predator hunter. With the initial confrontation successfully documented, my mission immediately pivoted from property defense to forensic exposure of Veronica Blackwell's VB criminal architecture. This wasn't merely a lapse in judgment, it was a systematic criminal operation, and I was about to dissect the HOA power structure she had hijacked to finance her corruption. Veronica had not assumed the HOA presidency. She had seized it and ruthlessly transformed it into an engine designed exclusively to subsidize her luxury real estate business. Her method was textbook financial hijacking. She used the illusion of community authority to silence legitimate residents and redirect community funds towards her personal gain. My audit, initiated via the federal process server, immediately targeted her modus operandi, the financial mechanism she used to fuel the fraud. The forensic CPA within me knew that her public posturing was merely a smokescreen for the smoking gun I sought, the unauthorized transfer of money. My investigation, executed in complete secrecy, quickly exposed the rot within her network. I discovered VB had manipulated HOA reserve funds, money earmarked for emergencies and legitimate maintenance, to pay fictitious legal fees. Specifically, she authorized an unauthorized $8,000 consultation fee paid to a shell legal entity that was directly, demonstrably linked to her luxury real estate brokerage. This was not an expense. It was a direct, documented act of embezzlement disguised as a fictitious easement study. The psychological impact of this discovery was immense. The community's HOA dues were not maintenance funds. They were protection money deployed to perpetuate her criminal enterprise. To solidify her control and bypass legitimate governance, Veronica Blackwell manufactured the Lakefront Access Committee. This was nothing more than a racketeering front, a 3-person circle that strategically excluded me, Frank Morrison, a 20-year resident, and Dr. Hawkins, the defrauded new buyer. This committee's sole operational purpose was to execute illegal maneuvers, allowing VB to authorize illegal community events on my private land without needing a legitimate full-board vote. This level of corporate and financial subterfuge proved that I was dealing with a professional predator, not a petty tyrant. Crucially, I began tracking her past victims to establish a pattern of predation. I identified the 3 families who had been coerced into paying premium, non-refundable access fees, sometimes $3,000 or more, directly to VB for the guaranteed use of the lake I owned. These families were not just random buyers, they were her victims, and more importantly, they were my future federal witnesses. The conflict ceased to be about trespassing. it became a mandate to dismantle systematic abuse and secure restitution for those she had financially crippled. This realization, that I was the community's last line of defense against financial implosion, provided the fuel necessary for the next phase of the attack. I leveraged the quiet title action I had prepared to make a second, strategic strike. While the FOIA request was forcing her to scramble and cover her financial tracks, I filed preliminary notice of intent to sue documentation with the county, ensuring that any new buyers researching the property would immediately see a cloud on title related to fraudulent misrepresentation of water rights. This was a financial death blow designed to freeze her entire sales portfolio in Pineridge. She couldn't sell a single home with the certainty that the title was about to be legally challenged for fraud. This preemptive lawfare proved I wasn't waiting for her next move. I was dictating the entire operational tempo. The inevitable escalation came when Veronica Blackwell attempted to discredit and terrorize her past victims. I documented her hitting Frank Morrison with yet another fraudulent fine, an act of sheer retaliatory arrogance. My countermove was instantaneous and technical. I didn't just fight the fine, I released a detailed, anonymously sourced community email containing the specific HOA bylaw clauses and legal precedents that proved her fine was illegal and actionable under state liability law. This quiet, technical resistance created the necessary friction that would ultimately break her. The moment she realized that every aggressive action she took was immediately countermeasured by a documented legal precedent, the pressure on her internal structure became unsustainable. The final piece of this phase was securing the cooperation of Susan Walsh, the HOA treasurer. Susan, initially weak and compromised, recognized the gravity of the insurance voiding notice that my audit uncovered. The realization that VB's fraud, listing my doc as an HOA asset to reduce her own brokerage's liability while simultaneously putting 47 families' mortgages at risk, was a financial contagion that could cause widespread homelessness. Susan immediately turned, offering to provide forensic evidence of all bank statement transfers and executive session minutes that detailed the financial malfeasance. The moment the treasurer flipped, the HOA power structure collapsed, and Veronica Blackwell became an exposed, isolated entity, ripe for federal intervention. The audit had commenced, the witnesses were turning, and the time for local dispute resolution was over. The gloves were off. With Susan Walsh, the HOA treasurer, now acting as my confidential forensic CPA, the war immediately escalated from a property line dispute to a full-scale financial audit targeting a multi-state criminal enterprise. My initial legal research deep dive, conducted not as leisure but as tactical intelligence gathering, quickly confirmed that Veronica Blackwell was not merely defrauding Pineridge. She was operating under a consistent, predatory modus operandi. We immediately pinpointed the smoking gun she had tried to bury beneath layers of fraudulent paperwork. The audit revealed 3 critical federal-level violations. First, insurance fraud, where VB had audaciously listed my private, non-HOA doc as an official HOA asset on the community's master liability policy, specifically to reduce her own brokerage's premiums and create the illusion of community access for her sales targets. Second, wire fraud using electronic communication, MLS listings, email solicitations, and Facebook promotions to propagate her false real estate claims across state lines. And third, blatant embezzlement, systematically transferring significant HOA reserve funds to a shell account that she directly controlled, masking them as consultation fees. The realization of the insurance fraud was the critical fragmentation point that shifted the entire dynamic. It wasn't just money she stole. She had engineered a financial contagion that threatened the entire subdivision. The HOA's master insurance carrier, upon discovering her false asset claims, had already initiated a voiding notice. This meant that within 72 hours, every single mortgage holder in Pine Ridge, 47 innocent families, could face a loan recall from their banks due to a lapse in mandated insurance coverage. This wasn't a risk. This was a systematic financial threat that had the potential to cause widespread homelessness. My tactical objective instantly changed. This was no longer about defending my dock. It was about eliminating a serial predator who was about to financially cripple an entire community. The rage that flooded my system was not personal. It was the cold, focused fury of an incident commander who recognizes an imminent, catastrophic structural collapse. I immediately deployed my attorney friend, David Kim, a specialist in white-collar crime and federal prosecution. The moment David reviewed the documented pattern, the fraudulent access fees, the manipulated insurance, the multi-state listing history, he didn't hesitate. He recognized the multi-state predatory pattern and confirmed the legal authority. We had the textbook elements required for a RICO Act, Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, prosecution. This was the nuclear option. RICO converts individual acts of fraud, wire fraud, and embezzlement into evidence of participation in a criminal enterprise, significantly elevating the potential sentence to a 20-year maximum and mandating full, non-negotiable restitution. Veronica Blackwell thought she was fighting a neighbor. She had, in reality, activated the full force of the federal government. In an act of predictable criminal desperation, VB initiated her own evidence destruction phase. My high-resolution, GPS metadata-stamped security cameras captured the footage. She deployed her teenage son to systematically and maliciously destroy my state-approved fish habitat structures with a crowbar, an act of sheer environmental and personal vandalism. Simultaneously, my property was subjected to an overnight surgical removal of all 12 boundary markers, an attempt to legally muddy the water and invalidate my surveys. I didn't simply file a police report for vandalism. I filed charges for conspiracy to commit vandalism and, crucially, obstruction of justice. Every desperate action she took, every dollar she spent on her defense, only generated new, compounding federal charges that would be used against her in court. The vandalized habitats and the missing stakes were not setbacks. They were new evidence beats proving her guilt. Our federal command center, my own living room, was immediately established. David Kim coordinated with the FBI Financial Crimes Unit and the State Attorney General's office. We deployed a three-pronged counterattack. First, the criminal referral to the FBI, attaching Susan Walsh's forensic accounting. Second, the preparation of the Emergency Federal Asset Freeze Order, designed to secure all of VB's known assets, including her luxury car and primary residence, ensuring the future payment of restitution. And third, the final notice of fraud to the State Real Estate Commission for permanent license revocation. This was a coordinated simultaneous strike, meticulously timed to hit her before she could complete the transfer of stolen funds offshore. A flight risk action confirmed by our federal surveillance contact, Agent Thompson. We had only 72 hours to execute the deployment before the catastrophic insurance deadline hit, forcing us into a non-negotiable, accelerated operational tempo. The air in the command center was thick with the electric tension of a tactical operation, fueled by strong coffee and the absolute certainty that we were about to eliminate a serial criminal threat. The realization that federal agencies were mobilizing against her drove Veronica Blackwell to catastrophic, predictable desperation. Her immediate countermove was lawfare. She hired Harrison Webb, a sharpshooter criminal defense attorney who specialized in neutralizing white-collar threats and carried a reputation for making inconvenient federal cases disappear. Webb's opening salvo was a massive, intimidating cease and desist letter, a 20-page document reeking of expensive cologne and legal arrogance. It threatened me with 500,000 plus hours in malicious, persecution, and intentional infliction of emotional distress lawsuits, classic predator tactics designed to invoke financial terror and coerce the victim into silence. I didn't flinch. David Kim immediately confirmed the obvious truth. Webb was being paid with the same stolen HOA funds he was supposedly defending, instantly creating a new charge of embezzlement and misuse of fiduciary funds against Veronica. Her attempt to use lawfare to scare me off only generated more, harder evidence for the prosecution. With the legal threat failing to land, Veronica escalated to her public masterpiece, the festival fiasco. In a final, audacious bid for community validation and financial gain, she launched the Pine Ridge Lakefront Festival on my private property. She deployed professional event planning trucks and a small army of vendors, inviting over 300 people from 3 counties and, crucially, Channel 7 News to document her triumph. Her plan was simple: create such a massive, irreversible public event on the dock that it would legally establish the fact of community use and make me the villain for attempting to shut down a charity event. She arrived in a rented golf cart decorated like a parade float, wearing a politician's costume and carrying a smile that could power the entire sound system. A perfect, televised image of malignant authority. My tactical response was preemptive, surgical, and devastating. I spent the entire morning of the festival executing full damage control. I didn't just call the event company, I called the county permitting office and the Channel 7 assignment editor. My investigation revealed that Veronica had used the HOA's legitimate tax ID number and had forged my property address to secure the necessary commercial permits. This was no longer fraud. This was a felony fraud violation that carried mandatory prison time. When the news crew arrived, I was waiting. I let the crowd, the 300 unsuspecting paying victims, gather on my lawn. I let Veronica begin her triumphant speech through a professional-grade megaphone about our beautiful community and the spirit of neighborhood cooperation. Then I executed the full operational shutdown. I walked out, not shouting, but with the unshakable calm of a professional asset. I carried my coffee, my folding chair, and, most importantly, the official county permitting documents confirming the forgery. The reporters immediately pivoted their cameras toward me, sensing the shift from community fluff to criminal drama. "Good morning, everyone," I called out cheerfully, settling into my chair with theatrical, deliberate comfort. "Beautiful day for a festival, especially since it's happening on my private, protected property without permission, using forged contracts and felony fraudulent permits." The crowd noise died like someone had cut power to the entire grid. The authority beat hit when I pulled out the county documents. I've spent the morning with county officials. Turns out using someone else's private property address for commercial permits is a felony, and what she's been running here is a systematic criminal enterprise. The Channel 7 reporter, smelling blood, stepped forward, microphone extended. This was the moment of public authority reveal. I didn't hold back. I stood up, holding my grandfather's property deed like a shield and a sword simultaneously. I am saying that Veronica Blackwell has been systematically defrauding buyers, forging permits, and stealing community funds to support a real estate scam that is about to collapse spectacularly. The final fragmentation point came when Dr. Hawkins, the key victimized buyer, stepped forward from the crowd. She ignored Veronica completely, addressing the camera and me directly. "I'm sorry," she stated, voice clear and steady. "Veronica specifically told me the lake access was guaranteed. I have the MLS listing right here. Exclusive community lakefront access, private dock privileges." Every single word was a documented, career-ending fraud. The crowd of 300 immediately turned into an angry mob demanding immediate refunds. The realization that they were all trespassing and had been systematically lied to by a federal criminal hit them with visceral force. Veronica's mask didn't just slip, it shattered completely. "Fine," she shrieked, her voice high with hysteria and desperation. "If you want to be a selfish, antisocial neighbor, I'll call the county about your unpermitted dock modifications. Your fish habitats are probably environmental violations too." I just smiled, reminding her that I was recording everything, and that her environmental claims were neutralized by my award-winning, fully permitted fish habitats. The damage was done. Her festival crowd was dispersing, her fraud was live on local television, and her public validation attempt had become a total, documented criminal exposure. The next day, she went into full scorched earth mode. Desperate to find a way out, she called an emergency executive session of the HOA board at 6 a.m. at her house. The agenda was pure dictatorial madness, a motion to remove disruptive member Marcus Presley, and, the ultimate move, a proposal to declare my lakefront property abandoned due to failure to maintain community standards, thus authorizing the HOA to maintain, I don't steal, the area. This was grand theft through parliamentary procedure. She thought she was conducting a private coup. I arrived at exactly 6 a.m., uninvited but legally armed, setting my coffee cup on her expensive glass table. "Actually, Veronica," I said, walking past her into her pristine living room, "Virginia HOA law requires all members be notified of any meeting affecting their property rights. Funny how you forgot that detail." Her face went panic pale as she realized I was not only there but recording everything on my phone. I then delivered the final, tactical blow. I pulled out the thick manila envelope Agent Thompson had provided, containing the official federal document. "I've brought some interesting reading material for everyone. Federal criminal indictment charging Veronica Blackwell with mail fraud, wire fraud, insurance fraud, and racketeering under RICO statutes." Her panicked whispers and subsequent hysterical, letter-opener waving lunge proved the definitive end of her sanity and her reign. The sound of heavy footsteps and approaching sirens in the distance, the FBI had moved up the arrest timeline due to her desperate asset transfers and threats, mixed with her final, unhinged rant. "When I go down, I'm taking everyone with me." I delivered the final tactical truth moments before the agents breached her door. "Actually, Veronica, when you go down, you're going down alone. Federal prosecutors offered immunity deals to anyone who cooperated. Guess how many people chose to protect you?" 0. The sound of handcuffs clicking shut through the window was the sweetest sound of uncompromising justice I had ever heard. The tactical situation was now critical and non-negotiable. The full coordinated strike had been activated, and the clock was ticking down to Veronica Blackwell's inevitable collapse, her hysterical meltdown and subsequent physical threat, a documented act of aggravated assault, and a clear violation of bond conditions, had granted the federal agencies the leverage they needed to move up the timeline for the final hammer. Agent Thompson, my handler in the FBI Financial Crimes Unit, confirmed that surveillance had captured conversations with Harrison Webb about temporary asset relocation and family safety preparations, undeniable evidence of flight risk behavior. When a criminal attempts to flee a federal investigation, the window for negotiation closes. Only overwhelming force remains. The emergency federal asset freeze order was immediately deployed. This was not a suggestion. It was a court-mandated financial annihilation. The order, executed with military precision across multiple jurisdictions, secured all of Veronica's known liquid accounts, seizing her primary residence, her spotless white BMW, and her high-value designer jewelry as security for future mandatory restitution. This preemptive move guaranteed that even if she somehow avoided prison, she would be financially crippled and unable to fund further lawfare against me or her victims. It was the absolute, final answer to her arrogant belief that she could buy her way out of federal indictment. The immediate fallout in the community was pure, necessary chaos. With Veronica Blackwell now in federal custody and her attorney effectively neutralized by the realization that his fees were embezzled funds, the HOA power structure imploded. Susan Walsh, our forensic CPA and newly courageous treasurer, immediately executed the stabilization phase. She moved to seize and secure all HOA bank accounts, issuing a cease and desist to Harrison Webb, informing him his services were now redundant, unwarranted, and paid for with stolen money. In coordination with David Kim, she leveraged the emergency quorum rules to officially and legally replace the board within hours of the arrest, preventing a power vacuum and, crucially, coordinating with the insurance carrier to stabilize the master liability policy. This rapid, clean surgical strike contained the financial contagion she had unleashed, saving the 47 families from immediate mortgage loan recall. The authority beat was delivered to the entire community via a televised emergency HOA meeting, a necessary formality for full legal disclosure and restitution proceedings. 200-plus residents, along with Channel 7 News and 3 uniformed FBI agents, packed the community center. The air crackled with the electric tension of a public reckoning. Veronica, out on a $500,000 bond, made a final defiant entrance, flanked by 2 private security guards paid for with her remaining stolen liquid assets. She attempted to deliver a prepared statement, painting herself as a victim of a malicious witch hunt and character assassination. Her audacity was breathtaking, a testament to her malignant self-delusion, but her words were hollow and impotent against the unshakable evidence we possessed. My mic drop moment was calculated for maximum public impact and irrefutable clarity. I stood up, feeling every eye in the room, including the FBI agents, fixated on me, and pulled out the thick binder prepared by Agent Thompson. Ladies and gentlemen, since Veronica seems confused about the facts, let me clarify the situation. The click of the binder opening echoed in the sudden, absolute silence. Veronica Blackwell was arrested yesterday morning on 17 federal charges, including mail fraud, wire fraud, insurance fraud, and racketeering under RICO statutes. She has been systematically defrauding this community for 3 years. I detailed the exact numbers. $45,000 stolen in fraudulent access fees, the manipulated insurance policy that risked every mortgage, and the multi-state predatory pattern that proved she was a repeat offender. The room erupted in unified rage as the residents fully absorbed the scope of her betrayal. Veronica Blackwell was surrounded by the victims she had financially manipulated and the federal authority she had foolishly activated. Her final desperate attempt to reclaim control involved grabbing the microphone and shrieking threats. "You want to destroy me? I'll take this entire community down with me." This was her final, self-destructive tactical error. Agent Thompson immediately moved forward, her badge visible and her voice carrying the absolute, non-negotiable authority of federal law enforcement. "Veronica Blackwell, you are under arrest for violation of bond conditions and threats against federal witnesses." The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut was met not with silence, but with a thunderous standing ovation from the entire room. Her reign of terror officially, publicly, and permanently ended in unmitigated humiliation and federal custody. I announced to the cheering crowd, "Your community is officially free." The taste of victory was sharper and sweeter than the scent of my grandfather's honeysuckle. The morning mist now rises off Clearwater Lake, like my grandfather's unconditional blessing, painting the water in the vibrant, undeniable colors of uncompromised justice. I sit on our family dock, coffee in hand, breathing air that smells purely of victory and the sweet, organic scent of honeysuckle, no longer polluted by diesel fumes or the stench of professional fraud. 6 months have elapsed since Veronica Blackwell's spectacular televised arrest, and the transformation of Pinery Ridge has been nothing short of miraculous. Her federal trial was not a defense. It was a prosecutor's dream and a criminal's absolute nightmare. Faced with the irrefutable evidence of wire fraud, insurance fraud, and the RICO documentation we meticulously compiled, she pleaded guilty to avoid the full 20-year RICO sentence, ultimately receiving a mandatory 4 years in federal prison, plus a requirement for full, non-negotiable restitution of $127,000 to every family she had systematically defrauded. Her real estate license was not suspended. It was permanently revoked in 12 states, and the FBI has now designated her case as a textbook example for prosecuting similar HOA fraud schemes nationwide. A final, humiliating legacy. The community healing happened with the speed and efficiency of neighbors who had finally reclaimed their power. Within 2 weeks of her perp walk, we had orchestrated a clean, legal coup. A new board was unanimously elected, featuring Susan Walsh as president, the forensic CPA, and Dr. Hawkins as treasurer, the chief defrauded witness. They immediately instituted transparency requirements that would make any government auditor weep with joy. Every single expenditure over $500 now requires resident pre-approval, and monthly financial reports are published online where every single homeowner can audit exactly where their money is deployed. The sweetest irony came when our insurance carrier not only maintained coverage, but reduced our premiums by 15%, after removing all of Veronica Blackwell's fraudulent claims and recognizing the community's swift legal action. Honest, transparent reporting actually saved the community money, a revolutionary concept for an HOA. Every one of the 23 defrauded families received full mandatory compensation through the federal asset seizure and restitution process. But the real community fortitude was demonstrated by what they chose to do with that reclaimed money. Dr. Hawkins immediately established a community legal aid fund to protect future victims. Frank Morrison, the elderly resident VB tried to fine, created a neighborhood watch program focused on helping neighbors, not harassing them. And Janet Rodriguez initiated a scholarship program dedicated to students pursuing law enforcement and forensic accounting careers, a direct countermeasure to the criminal who nearly bankrupted them all. My property rights, once contested, are now protected by legal documentation so bulletproof it could survive nuclear lawfare. More importantly, my dock has been re-sanctified into the place my grandfather always intended. A space where genuine community collaboration happens organically, without the coercion of an HOA dictator. The crowning achievement came when I organized our first Clean Water Conservation Festival on the lakefront. Not as a mandatory HOA requirement, but as a genuine celebration of what neighbors can achieve when they work together instead of against each other. That festival, fully permitted and documented, raised $25,000 for the Property Rights Legal Defense Fund, a scholarship dedicated to law students focusing on HOA reform and community advocacy. The first recipient was Janet Rodriguez's granddaughter, Maria, who is now actively pursuing environmental law with a focus on protecting families from corporate and bureaucratic predators. The festival has metastasized into an annual success, growing to over 500 visitors last year, featuring local food trucks and music, and raising funds that now finance 3 separate scholarships and an emergency assistance program for neighbors facing hardship. My personal transformation was complete. I became a state-certified HOA ombudsman, dedicating my retirement to helping other besieged communities resolve disputes before they escalate to federal crimes. Last month, I testified before the Virginia legislature about critical reform legislation designed to prevent future Veronica Blackwells from systematically destroying neighborhood financial stability. The book deal was the final acknowledgement. How I Beat HOA Fraud and Saved My Community launches next spring with all proceeds funding the legal defense scholarship. Apparently, the public demands stories where ordinary citizens defeat systematic corruption through preparation, persistence, and an absolute refusal to be intimidated by bullies. The deepest satisfaction, however, comes from these quiet moments. Sitting here, I realize that property rights aren't just about land or boundary markers. They are about protecting families and preserving legacies for future generations. Just moments ago, my phone buzzed with a text from Agent Thompson. New multi-state HOA fraud case in North Carolina. Need your expertise. The answer is, and always will be, yes. Communities everywhere deserve unconditional protection from predators who steal dreams for profit. The morning bird songs mix with the distant, genuine laughter of children from our new playground as the mist clears to reveal a lake that is peaceful, protected, and permanently secured. This is the unshakable sound of total victory when good people refuse to let criminals win. What began as a property dispute ended as a federal case that saved dozens of families and created lasting, positive, systematic change. Sometimes standing up to one criminal protects absolutely everyone.